Good morning and welcome back to the Space Madness podcast with your host, Jeff Nassano. Today we continue our discussion with Dr. Jim Green, former chief scientist of NASA. And I think we'll get started right there. And where we left off the last call was basically leading up to that appointment as chief scientist. So why don't we start with, what does that email look like? Hey, we'd like you to be chief scientist. What's that look like?
Well, I got a call actually from the acting administrator, which was Robert Lightfoot at the time. This was during Trump's first term in 2018. He had nominated Jim Bridenstine to be a NASA administrator. And what happened between when Charlie Bolden left and Lightfoot was then acting and then waiting for the confirmation, that just takes time. And usually that acting administrator is just trying to hold the agency together, keep it going, not make any really big decisions. And so I think what happened was Jim Bridenstine knew he was going to be, looked like he was going to be nominated, not only through the nomination process, but confirmed. He just asked Lightfoot, hey, if there's open positions, start filling them. Okay. And that's usually you usually wait for the administrator to do that. Now, what is the chief scientist? Well, the chief scientist is on the administrator's staff. So the administrator has to, want a chief scientist, okay? And then once that's confirmed, you want a chief scientist. How you get one is all over the place. There's been an astronaut as a chief scientist. That was John Grunsfeld. There's been scientists in the agency for long periods of time, like myself. Jim Garvin is another one. And there have been chief scientists that are from the outside community, like Ellen Stofan. She was brought in to the agency to be the chief scientist. The decision on how one becomes that is done by the administrator. So I think Robert asked several people, what like Thomas Zurbuchen, who was my boss at the time, I was head of planetary science, probably said, something like, these are the things that Jim Bridenstine's looking for in a chief scientist. Give me some recommendations. And I'm sure I was on the list or I wouldn't have been called. So Robert called me. I was at a conference, a science conference, and I think he called me like on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and I was about ready to return back home on Friday, and he asked me to become chief scientist, and I said, well, I'm not home. I need to chat with the wife. These are important big steps. And even though it's still down at NASA headquarters and I moved my office from A to B, there are different responsibilities. Okay. Sure. And those responsibilities are no longer am I doing nothing but planetary science. As chief scientist, I'm advising the administrator in an independent way on all science that's being done in the agency. Okay. I'm doing everything from reviewing press releases to going to places that he wants me to go. Since Jim Bridenstine did get confirmed, and he would say, Jim, I need to have you go here, give this talk, or can you put this together? Or you would just call me up and say, hey, I need an update on what's happening in X. Like what are we doing what are some of the latest results on the moon or on Mars? And I just walk down the hall and we'd sit down and chat for a half hour or so. And he was fabulous to work with. I really, really, really enjoyed working with Jim Bridenstine because he really just absorbed it, asked great questions. And then I would hear later that he was at a center or at a giving talks, and he was talking about the science that he had just learned about. Okay. And did a perfect job,
Oh, great.
Going over.
I have a fun brief story with him. So this poster here is my my one attendance on Capitol Hill at NASA Technology Day in 2019.
Okay.
It was about my my NIAC Phase 2 project about the caves on the moon. And so I'm standing there, and Administrator Bridenstine walks by, and of course I try to corner him appropriately. And I talk about it, and he says, hey, this is great. This should be a program of record. And my ears perk up, and I said, well, I accept cash, checks, and gold bullion. And he laughed, and I said, well, I'll email your office, and obviously that was the end of it, but that was my fun little interaction. And it actually reminds me of a story Lou Friedman told me of when he and Carl Sagan went to talk to President Carter. And President Carter had said to Carl, "You're such a great writer, you should write more books." And Carl Sagan said, "Mr. President, you could make these missions happen with a signature." And apparently, as Lou tells it, President Carter smiled, and of course there was a recognition that, well, it's an exchange of political capital, and it's not quite as simple as that. And so I later realized, well, that was Administrator Bridenstine being polite, and I lacked the political capital to actually execute on that. So
well,
that's my fun little story.
What probably would have happened is if your email would have ended up on my desk.
Well, so that's up. So okay, so.
But it didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah. So we'll take that one offline. No, I'm just
all right.
So anyway, so that's my fun little story with Administrator Bridenstine.
Great. Well, we had a wonderful time. Yeah, as I said, I got home, talked to the wife, and she said, "Yeah, go for it." And indeed, that meant that my travel schedule changed radically. So instead of going only to planetary science stuff, I went to the International Space Station conferences, which means I had to turn my attention to other science going on in the administration. And I really got a tremendous appreciation for what was happening in the other disciplines in the agency. I was, you're aware of things, you hear about things, but if you have to give a talk about them, okay,
sure,
and you have to represent them at a meeting as if you're there supporting the administrator, you better know what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I worked really hard to be able to do that, and I had a blast. And that lasted for several years, and even after the administration changed and Bill Nelson came in. That was also an important relationship.
I'm curious, before we move on to Bill Nelson,
sure.
I'm curious, during that upskilling journey from planetary to all NASA science, I'm curious what stands out in your mind as maybe surprising things you learned or were exposed to at NASA that maybe, the average space interested person might not ever encounter. I mean, I'm the idea of being able to open up the book, so to speak, and go find the obscure corners, curious what stands out in your memory.
Well, fortunately, because I was a civil servant, I had a huge background in knowing what centers are doing what, and a pretty good relationship with all the center chief scientists. So I formed a group of chief scientists from each of the centers, and we would meet monthly. I felt that as chief scientist for NASA, I was also representing them. If they needed help about a particular topic or support,
sure,
or they needed to get information to Jim in some way, then it would be through me. And so we had monthly meetings, and that's really where I learned an enormous amount about some of the problems going on in the agency. Our equipment is old. The early part of building NASA, where the budget went, really high and all that stuff, and everyone talks about, well, it used to be so high, so large, and now it's so small. Well, it was so large because it was building buildings. It was creating centers. And it was creating facilities and building vacuum chambers and doing all the stuff you have to do to create a space enterprise, a space
program,
business. Yeah.
And then and it took me 3 years to get Photoshop at JPL for proposal graphics. Yeah.
Well, you should have talked to your chief scientist. He might have been able to help you.
Yeah.
But, the situation then is now our equipment is aging. Created in the 60s and into the 70s, and now new tools and techniques are available. We have to upgrade things. So there was always those kind of things going on where the scientists are struggling. NASA needs scientists, just like they need engineers. Even though the commercial sector does a lot of stuff and is taking on more and more stuff, the kind of things that NASA's doing is one-of-a-kind research or finding out things that are important for human exploration. And with that comes the responsibility that the agency has to preserve life, to make sure astronauts are safe, to really understand these environments that astronauts are going to. And that requires a cadre of top scientists. So you have to have good facilities to be able to attract good people. And so that was very important, not only to the chief scientist, but obviously I took up that cause as much as I could. And I tried to make their job as easy as I could from a programmatic, as we call it, perspective, and remove some barriers. If there were things that I could do, I did it to remove barriers that enabled them to get their job done and enabled them to attract good people and keep a vibe.
Well, I think I really like the way you answer that, because that wasn't actually the question I asked, but the way you answered it really speaks to your character as an enabler and as a team leader. And again, the way you focused on your the people who reported to you and getting them what they needed is, I think, what makes a great leader. And that was characteristic of the leadership and management that I had, that I would have again. I'll put it that way. Not everybody thinks that way, but what I was really curious about was the scientific subject matter that really surprised you, or maybe you didn't even know about. Just curious about a couple of highlights.
Okay, the International Space Station is an area I didn't know much about. Okay, from my position as head of planetary, where we're all over the place, flying by this planet and that planet. We always called that indoor sports. You're in a confined area in microgravity, and so how that might relate would be the formation of early formation of going from dust to larger objects into planetesimals, and you could do some analysis on the International Space Station in that area, but that would be pretty much the limit of that. And so everything they were doing was new to me. And it's really fantastic what was happening. We were right in the middle of the twins study. Okay. Now, the twins study is where you have identical twins that are astronauts, the Kelly brothers, Scott Kelly and his brother, Mike Kelly. Scott went into orbit. Mike stayed on the ground. He was what we would call the control in that experiment. And the key that was happening in this twin study is they were going right down into the genes, right down, looking at the DNA and what's going on in space between how the genes interact. Some are inhibited, some are all of a sudden activated and do things to the body that we didn't know before. So, and you discover that by bringing Scott Kelly back to Earth, and you make a comparison, because they were identical when they went up, and now all these changes happened in space. It must be because of space, not because of age.
Sure.
And so that was really eye-opening to me, and I got very fascinated by that. And since then, I've actually worked with Oxford on an experiment that has gone up to the International Space Station, not only once but twice, and they're analyzing the data right now in Oxford, England.
Wow. So is that obviously not another twin study, but is that a tissue experiment?
It is a tissue experiment. We sent up 2 types of organoids, which is a collection of cells from a particular organ. We are complex bodies because our cells specialize. Okay, we're not just one cell that does the same thing. We have bone cells and hair cells and heart cells and etc.
Well, we don't all have hair cells. But
okay. Oh, you do have hair cells.
Okay.
They're just not where you think they should be. Okay.
Fair enough.
All right. But bottom line is we sent up 6 vials, and in each vial are 2 organoids. So it's a collection of cartilage cells and ligament cells that connect to the cartilage. Now, in space, certain genes get inhibited, which means they don't work in space. Some genes get expressed, which means the inhibited genes here on Earth, when you go into space, all of a sudden now are activated. They are what they are called expressed. And now they start working with RNA, telling RNA to build this or build that. So this particular experiment attacks the process called autophagy. Okay. Now, autophagy is the process in your body that takes material that's in a cell that's not usable and eliminates it. Okay, cleans up the
Okay.
crap in a cell. Now, how does the crap get there? Well, a gene can tell RNA, make me a protein. The RNA makes the protein. The gene says that's wrong, doesn't use it, and it just sits and accumulates. The body has to get rid of that stuff. You either break it apart and use pieces of it again, or you flush it out. And if you don't start doing that, you get swelling. The cells swell. It starts a process for which the cell all of a sudden says, okay, I can't clean myself, so I'm going to die. And that's called senescence.
Okay.
So this experiment is connected to aging. As we age, the cells don't clean themselves up. The autophagy doesn't work as well. And death, because the cell will go into senescence and die. If that happens throughout the organ, you have organ failure, and then everyone says, well, they died of old age. Okay, well, what are the kind of things that we could do based on gene expression that occurs in space that would activate autophagy here on Earth? And so that experiment, we had these 6 vials, and we had several sets of nutrients we were going to inject in them and see if we couldn't kick in the autophagy process and clean up the cells, which would be great. If we could do that, then we're really keeping the body healthy as we age.
So the idea is that there's some mechanisms in the space environment, or mechanisms that change the way these systems work, maybe radiation or gravity or something. I mean,
well, you're right. We don't know exactly all the things that happened to Scott Kelly in space, where his genes became expressed, started to work when they didn't, where they didn't work here on Earth in a particular way, whether that was due to radiation or whether that was really due to microgravity.
Yeah.
Some of those questions still need to be answered. But the end result of the twin study, which was managed by Chris Mason, was a fabulous book Chris wrote. A fabulous book. I'd recommend it, which is called The Next 500 Years.
Wow.
If you want to know,
show notes.
If you want to know how we're going to go to Mars, he proposes that we need a little genetic engineering. Okay. We need to get the body working in the right way. And that means this genetic engineering would have to go on for an astronaut to have the best chance of surviving in an environment where the gravity is lower, temperature's lower, many different environmental conditions, more radiation's available. And, your gut microbes have got to change. You're growing plants in an area where there's probably some toxins. The microbiome's got to get in there and keep you healthy. All these kind of things have to be considered, and we now have a lot of the tools to be able to do it, to be able to fix cells. Like CRISPR and all kinds of new medical things. And so he's bringing in the medical world of the things that are being investigated on International Space Station and proven, and things that are happening in hospitals, and bringing it together and creating a plan for how humans would be able to live and work in space and thrive. Not just live, but thrive.
Yeah. Well, I love that segue, because one of my goals with this podcast is to share that there are all kinds of different ways to make an impact in the space world. And one of them is medicine, and certainly an increasingly important one, and just a fascinating one endlessly to me. And so I hope the listener will take away from that NASA needs space exploration, needs doctors, nurses, graphic designers. Basically everybody, is about computer people, everything. So
they do. Well, let's talk about a couple aspects of that I also got excited about, and that was I got involved in the metaverse.
Okay. Now,
it turns out I've always liked introducing technologies as I've gone along. As we've talked about before, it was one of the original creator for NASA's first internet. I brought in the NASA, not only the World Wide Web, but created organizational structures on the World Wide Web first for NASA across the agency. and then used it to get access to data that we were putting online in the International Space Station. So new technologies were always real important to me. So as I was going from place to place in the world, talking to various new space agencies, several things were occurring that I was running into. One was, I mean, I have to put this in context. The context is when I first started in the early 60s in space, early 70s in space, there was really only 4 or 5 space agencies. Now there's 75 space agencies. Okay. Every, country recognizing the importance of space is now turning to its population and saying, hey, we're going to use some of our tax monies and we're going to create a capability where we're going to leverage and use assets that we put into space to help life here on Earth and coordinate and cooperate with other big agencies that are going other places, like the moon and then on to Mars, through agreements like the Artemis Accords. So the Artemis Accords, which Bridenstine's organization with Mike Gold started, is a fabulous agreement where we're all going to work together in some way. Each individually, space agency is going to a country, because countries sign it, not space agencies, but countries sign it. And the country is obligating their space agency to work with NASA in this area to do something that supports this grand goal of going to the moon and then on to Mars. So I'm going to countries that are just starting their space agency, and I recognize as I talk to them, they're going to, we're going to put out a hiring call, we're going to bring people in, and we're going to build this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to, and every one of them want to hire within their country, but yet their country doesn't support, the rest of the country doesn't support an industry in space. For instance, at a university, there's no courses in aerospace engineering. In most cases, there's no courses in planetary science or astrobiology or many of the things that are heavily space. And so consequently, I recognized, hey, we need a way to bring the expertise in space to students and others, and we could do that in the metaverse. So I ended up working with a group in England, a group called the Metavisionaries, who was putting together some really creative environments in the metaverse. So you would put on your Oculus and you'd walk into a spaceship orbiting the Earth. I actually helped design several of these sets. Instead of a game where you're fighting monsters and you're running through this town and that town, you actually go into a lecture room, a huge dome that's orbiting the Earth, and there you're going to talk to the NASA chief scientist or other top scientists in the world, and you might be coming from Saudi Arabia or or India or Japan or many other countries that either have had space programs over the years or just starting. And so consequently, we started teaching in the metaverse. During the school year, I teach on the weekends. Just put on an Oculus and walk in, and I've got like 10 students or so. I don't have to have a gazillion students. And these students are all over the world.
So what
They're from all over the world.
So then this is offered domestically via these other space agencies. Do I have that right?
Some of the agencies we've worked with. The Saudi Space Commission really liked the idea. They were developing an idea on what their space agency should do. And so the concept of using the metaverse to teach many of their young students, getting them some inspiration. It's not really about, it's at this stage, it's more inspirational. It's more background information than it is, a curriculum that you get into.
Sure.
So, in fact, several of the students, so the Saudi Space Commission was promoting it, and the Jameel Foundation gave us money for students on scholarships. And so we've worked several of those situations over the last couple of years. And a couple of the students have just done really well. One of them has become a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, in astrophysics, that really makes a difference, I think, in many different ways. And it's a method for us to really teach, even though we're very remote. Now, this brings up the additional space connection. And I'm really serious about this. When you look at the biggest problems NASA has for astronauts going to Mars, where they're going to go and live and work on Mars for, be gone a year. They're going to be in confinement, not only getting there, but, they'll be confined to habitats on the surface unless they go out and do things. And of course, they're expected to do that. But the bottom line is the ability to maintain a healthy mental outlook is eroded over time due to confinement and due to severe conditions. And so there a study by Jack Stuster and others looking at what will happen with a six-person crew going to Mars. There is a 89% probability that one of them will become severely depressed. Okay, so that's going to happen. One of the crew is going to be so depressed that they're not going to be able to get their tasks done, and then others will have to do their tasks. Then resentment occurs, and so the psychological health of the astronauts is critical. Okay, and then you look at what's happening in virtual reality in the United States in the hospitals. Virtual reality is helping people with depression. Okay, big time. And the problems that veterans have coming back and becoming acclimated, that they're having trouble, and they need an environment for which they can act out their frustrations, and a virtual reality seems to do that. A year or two ago, there was a study in Japan where a woman had lost her child. A young woman in her 20s lost her first child, and her child was passed away in some horrible event, and she was inconsolable. She just cried all the time. She was just getting more and more depressed. And what they did is the Japanese created an environment that she was very familiar with, some room in her house, as I remember, and an avatar of her daughter. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. And they stuck them on, and she went right into the room, and there was her daughter, and they interacted. Okay. And you would think, God, it's got to be cruel. What are you talking about? But here's what happened is the mother had an opportunity to say goodbye, had an opportunity to interact with the child and mentally come to an understanding of the death process and express what she always wanted to express, always wanted her daughter to know. And now that they're separated via death, she felt that she did that.
Wow.
And then came out of the metaverse and started on a path of healing. An aspect of that is the virtual reality lights up different parts of your brain and allows your brain to heal. Instead of getting all these negative thoughts, no one's going to miss me if I'm gone, all this stuff. You're now in a different frame of mind of, who will take care of my husband? Who will take care of the family? Who if I die, what's going to happen next? Now you're thinking in the right way rather than in the wrong way. And so now here's how it relates to space. You're going to have to create a virtual environment for these astronauts to walk into. It is literally the holodeck. The crazy idea of the holodeck. When that was introduced on Star Trek, I'm going, oh, wow, what is this? This is a vehicle for them to explore other venues. But in reality, psychologically, it's incredibly important for the astronauts to be able to have the ability to mentally escape, to mentally refresh. You could then put on your Oculus as an astronaut, even though you're in a can with 5 other your best friends, or they better be, and ignore them. Put your system on and walk into a forest and sit down and read. And just look around in the beautiful forest that you're familiar with, or sit down at a table and have a meal with your family, where your family are avatars.
Have you ever tried the demo of the Apple Vision Pro?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So then you've had, I think, the same experience I had. And one of the parts of that demo is the screen blanks, and then you're sitting at a kid's birthday party at their dinner table. And when it's one of their live images or whatever it's called, 3D images. And that experience, it was so realistic. It completely fooled my brain to the point that not only did I did my social software activate. Oh, I'm in a room full of people. But a deeper level of, oh my God, I've broken into this family's home. That was my instinctual reaction. It got several layers deep of my social and society software in my mind. And I had that moment. It brought me back to a moment of my childhood where I actually went into the wrong house because my cousins lived in a series of home that they were all identical down the street. And I got out of the car and I went into the wrong house. And it flashed me back to that moment of childhood when I realized I was in the wrong house. And so I completely understand where you're going. And it just makes me think of what an incredible spin-off benefit, for lack of a better term, of a Mars journey.
Yeah.
To create systems for such extreme deprivation and separation that could flow out in the way that the obvious technologies, the fuel filters, the electronics and all the other stuff that came out of Apollo. So, and of course, the emphasis on mental health is always valuable. So very, very interesting. Is this program ongoing right now that you're talking about?
Yeah, actually, I'm working with an astronaut right now in a couple aspects of this. So my introduction to what was happening on International Space Station as a chief scientist has led me to do some research in this area. And to me, it's very exciting, very fun. It allows me to use my creativity in a way that hopefully will benefit the agency, bring up some new ideas, maybe start some new lines of research or activity that need to be done. Anything like that I can do, I'm going to do, Although I've left NASA after 42 years, you have to retire to something. And as a scientist, that's easy because you're going to retire to research. You're going to continue to do research at some level, in some way, whether you participate or give some talks, be a co-author on a paper or two. Those are the kind of things that happen where the scientist continues to be productive and feel productive. Mentally, that's critical in my mind to stay active, okay? Even though physically, we age, our body ages, and there are processes that take over that over time, may be mitigated through research in space, like the autophagy process we talked about. It's another way here on Earth that you can kick in your autophagy process, and that's through fasting. Fasting seems to have the ability to kick in autophagy. So, but the key is you want measurable success, and you want to understand what the process is all about. And understanding your body and keeping your body healthy is critical too. So those are some of the dimensions that are new to me that I'm involved in.
That's fantastic. Now, let's keep going forward though. That was a long, not a tangent that minimizes it, but that was a long diversion from your journey, which we left off with Bill Nelson. So what was that transition like? And what stands out?
Well, of course, at a change of administration, in particular, change where you change parties. I'm sure Jim put in his resignation letter and it was accepted. Jim Bridenstine's letter was accepted. And then Joe Biden assigned through the Senate approval process, Bill Nelson the opportunity to be the administrator. So Bill came in and kept the chief scientist position. I was there, but I was also, and we interacted, not quite as much as I did with Jim Bridenstine, but, I was constantly available to him. And we'd be in these staff meetings and I would contribute as I did with Jim Bridenstine and his team. So what was happening personally to me was I now was getting to the point where at 42 years, the NASA retirement system that I was in, it's time to retire.
Okay.
If you go too much farther beyond 42 years, you're giving the money back to the government. Your benefits, the benefit of retiring after, when you maximize everything is what I as a person, have to personally take into account my situation and maximize the benefit for myself and my family. It's now time to retire. Okay. After 42 years. So I went through the process, and while I was doing that and retiring, Bill got the idea of, oh, hey, let's change the position by not only keeping chief scientist, but adding an additional responsibility, which would be the climate czar for the agency. So he went out to seek who would be my replacement that had a huge background in climate change. And so that was Kate Calvin. And I helped him do that. Not only provided names, but also was involved in evaluating the applications that came in, and I made my recommendation. And he selected Kate. So then I was in the process of retiring. And he asked me to stick around for a little bit, so there was overlap. This is very rare in the government. So my hat's off to Bill for this. He and Pam Malroy, who was his deputy, asked me to stick around and help train Kate, because she was coming from the outside. As I mentioned, when you build your staff at that level, you want input in different ways. Maybe you want input from the centers, through their center scientists to the chief scientist. So you want a civil servant there, or you want to bring in somebody from the outside with an outside science view. And that's what he did. And with Kate and her ability to interact with the climate community. And so I spent, not quite a year, but many months working with Kate and talking about various parts of the agency. Here's what I learned we talked about everything from what's going on with NEOs to planetary science to astrophysics, and she, of course, was telling me about climate change. Hey, I'm always up to learning new things.
Yeah.
In what was happening in the world of modeling and understanding how the weather changes into long-term climate trends. So that was great. And then I officially retired. But as soon as I retired, then I just started 2 companies. So one of the companies is called MetaVisionaries US.
Okay.
So I continue on with teaching in the metaverse. And the other company is called Space Science Endeavors, where I'm doing scientific research and consulting. And I'm having a blast.
Well, is that so? Under the research umbrella, is that this ongoing station study on the tissue study? I'm sorry. So is that the connection?
For that, indeed, that's done in my research area. Yeah. So I got very much involved with what was happening at ESA and helped Oxford by advising them and working with them to get into the Columbus module in an environment called ice cubes, which is a cube. You can do your experiment in a cube, and that can be in the space station in microgravity in the radiation environment that it is in, and do your experiment that way. That's the best way to go. And so that's an ESA module. So I had an opportunity to work with Oxford to be able to get the ESA module opportunity, and Oxford took that, and off we went, and we got our tissues up there not once but twice.
Fantastic. Now, I'm just imagining, so for my proposal hat is always at least half on. So I'm imagining former chief scientist of NASA puts in a proposal to is it CASIS? Is that the organization?
Yes, if you work on the NASA side. But for me, I didn't do that. I worked on the ESA side.
Got it. Okay, I see.
Because that was the form factor that fit the best for the kind of thing they wanted to do.
Sure.
And that went through great. The evaluations, they got top marks. ESA has the same kind of situation. You've got to be able to propose. You got to know what you're going to do, how you're going to measure it, and determine the effects that space provide in the environment. And worked out great.
Good. Well, I think one of the closing questions that comes to me is, how do you see the role of the chief scientist moving forward and changing over time?
Right. Well, what's happened is since I left, there was a new election. Now the Republican administration is back in. Trump administration is there. As NASA's decided is taking the responsibility of slimming down in my 42 years, I've seen everything from rifts to buyouts to hiring freezes to hiring booms. And it's very administration dependent. It's very congressionally dependent on the budget and the activities. And so this administration that we're in today wants to slim down the government. Well, the only way to slim down the government is to reduce some of its responsibilities and to reduce the role size. So Janet Petro, who became the acting head after Bill Nelson left, the acting administrator, got rid of the chief scientist role. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the chief scientist serves on the staff. And if she feels that she didn't need that kind of input that they were providing, then she can get rid of it. She can, and that's happened before. Mike Griffin,
really?
when he
Okay.
came in, didn't want a chief scientist.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so you really serve at the pleasure of the administrator, and in supporting what they want, their roles and responsibilities have to be fulfilled, and you're part of that then.
Okay. Interesting. So it may return someday.
It's totally up to a new administrator.
Sure. Okay. So very interesting. So any more closing thoughts to bring it all together? Anything from VR to Civil War ballooning to orbiting tissue studies?
Well, okay. So, I've got a fabulous book out. Okay. And it's this one. It's Mars, Photographs from the NASA Archive. It's a great book, very popular. In fact, it is. The first edition is already sold out in the United States in a period of like 4 months. And now it's hopefully it's a Taschen book. Now hopefully Taschen is supplied the U.S. Bookstores, etc., and Amazon with the opportunity to get some more of these. Another book that has come out that I've done is I've done a chapter in this book. This book is Secrets on Display in the Spy Museum. And so chapter 6 here is a chapter I wrote on military intelligence from Civil War balloons.
Fascinating.
And so the Spy Museum hosted a fabulous history conference many years ago, and I was part of that. And it was decided, hey, so many things that are going on in this field relate to the museum and displays on the museum. If we can get some of the speakers to write some of the background information and some new information that comes out through doing histories of military intelligence. But let's do that. And this book came from that. So it came from a talk I gave at a history conference, 6 or more years ago, and had a wonderful time. And that book now is out.
Wonderful. I really appreciate the time I've gotten to spend with you. I like the diverse subjects we've been able to cover. And maybe in a year or so, we do another episode, talk about the education stuff, see how VR has changed, and so on. So thank you very much once again for 2 fascinating episodes.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks to the audience for listening. This is the Space Madness podcast, and we will see you next time.